Hello everyone and welcome to my coloring corner. Today is Fun Stuff Friday and we have a little bit of fun stuff here. Art Beek has sent me their 80 regular bullet chisel markers, and I've gone through and rearranged them and swatched them and whatnot, and we're going to play with these today. So like I said, I have gone through and rearranged them so they are in color order. This is not how you get these. Um, they are a bit of a mess when you get them, but I did go through and sort them all out. I'm going to take them out of the flimsy bag that they come in, and thankfully they come in holders. So they come in a good solid plastic holder. It's got the different squares in it for the barrels, and they fit in there quite nicely. The bag is a normal canvas bag, and it's not an extremely cheap one. It's a lot sturdier than some of the ones I've seen, but it's still the canvas bag, which is fine. If it comes with the holders, it's a lot easier to deal with than the soft-sided canvas bags without a holder, because then your pens just flop around and it's annoying. All right, so let's take a look at the pens. So I've got them in color order, so they've got a pretty good color selection. So we've got some yellows, oranges, peaches, pinks, purples, blues, blue-greens, greens, browns, grays, and blacks. So it's got a pretty good color selection for an 80 set. These are fine nib and chisel. I do prefer the um, brush nib and chisel, but these were sent to me without charge for review, so I'm not going to complain. So the fine nib has a gray line around it, and of course the chisel nib. Now I have noticed a couple of issues with the chisel nibs, and I'm trying to remember which one it was. But on one of these, the nib itself is pulled out a little bit, and I think I can just push it back in, but I can't remember which one it is. And again, I will probably find it while I'm coloring with them. They do seem to have a good amount of ink in them, and they don't spray when I open them, which is great. Don't like a marker that sprays when you open them. And they click closed, so make sure you hear that little click, otherwise it won't be closed properly. They do have the color name and number on each end of the marker. It is not anywhere on the barrel, however. So if you take off both ends of your marker, make sure that you keep the caps in a place where you know where they're at. I do tend to take both ends of my marker off so I can flip it back and forth. And usually I go by the color on the marker, but these do not have a color listed on the marker itself. So make sure you keep that lid close by. All right, well, it is swatch time, so grab your cup of coffee and sit back and relax. And I'll do the swatch. It's going to be about 3 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. It's not a long swatch. It is only 80 markers, and they are markers. And we know how markers go. They go pretty quick. So sit back, relax, and we will swatch these babies. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. So as you can see, I've got them in a fairly good color order. I do have a couple that, eh, they're not quite where I wanted them to be, but that's okay. And as you can see in different areas, I'm going to switch you over to the close-up camera so you can see. This is done on the Express It marker paper, but as you can see in some areas where I didn't go over it twice, there is a clear definition between the layers. So make sure that you keep your edges wet, and if you go over one area, go over that second area as well. Otherwise, you're going to get an uneven coloring. But we do have names and numbers. So we've got and some of the names just don't match up. Like salmon pink is not yellow in my brain. Um, it's just not. Uh, so we've got our yellows into our skin tones, peach tones. The reason why these are separated is because of the different tones. So this is a light and a dark of this tone. This one here should be on the other side of that one, which gives us our skin white, fruit pink, and light orange. And then into our orange, our marigold, French vermilion, and vermilion. And then we start going into our reds. So this is the lightest to the darkest, and then we go into our pinks. This one here should be on the other side of that one, or this one should be on the other side of that one. It's just the different tone of the pink. So we've got our bright pinks, we've got our medium pinks, and then we've got our light pinks down here. And then we've got our purples, so we've got our red violets here, our pale colors here, and then our very dark purple there. And then we got our blues, and this blue-green here should be down here. Like I said, I'm not perfect at all. So we've got our dark blues into our medium blues, and then into our light blues, and our blue greens, and then into our greens. This one here, I'm still debating on where that one should have gone. This one here should have gone up there. And then we've got our yellow greens into our olive brown greens, and then our olive colors, and then into our browns. Down here we have our grays. We've got warm gray 9, warm gray 6, and warm gray 3. Blue gray 7, blue gray 3, no, blue gray 5, and blue gray 3. Green gray 4, green, no, that's green gray 5, sorry. green gray 3, cool gray 9, and then our black. And that is all 80 colors. Now it does not come with a blender pen, which is fine. Of course, if you have other markers, you probably have plenty of blender pens around. We are going to be actually coloring because doing a test with these is kind of pointless. So we're going to color a page. I chose this page because there's a lot of smaller details to show the nib working, as well as some open areas to show the chisel working. So we're going to start by doing our background. So let's grab our pale baby blue, which is number 144. And we're going to start, and this is also done on the marker paper. So it goes this way. And I prefer a brush nib because they're a little bit more flexible on getting into small crevices. So I'm going to take both ends off of this so that I can get into these smaller areas. Now, if you are like me and tend to work with several pens at a time, doing your blending and that sort of thing, make sure that you keep your caps in an area where you're going to find them, because they are going to be hard to match up to the pen if you take them all off. Now, because I did stop there, I'm just going to go over that whole area again, wetting down the area so that it doesn't look different than the other area. If you put down just one layer, you're going to get a very light coloring. The more layers you put down, of course, the darker the marker is going to get. And darker still if you let it dry first and then put another layer down. Now, I don't suggest using markers on coloring book pages. They do spread a lot more. An alcohol marker will always bleed through the paper, so I'm not worried about bleed through. Always keep something behind your page if you are using it in a book so that you don't get marker on your other pages. Paper is very important when it comes to markers. The smoother the paper, the better. So if you are going to print your picture on a paper and color it with markers, try to make sure that you have a very smooth cardstock, either a cover stock or a marker paper. It allows you to manipulate the marker ink a lot easier than if you were to put it on a more porous, rougher paper. All right, so I'm not going to sit here and color blue all day, so we're just going to cover this area here with the bullet, and then we're going to go into some of the larger areas with the chisel so that we can show you how easy it is to cover an entire larger area with it. Now the chisel does have a good stiff tip so you can get into some of those finer areas with it. Like I said, just keep your edge wet. And then once you get into those larger areas, you can do larger strokes with the whole nib, covering a large area quite quickly. Not going to do the dragonflies or the moth's wings. We don't want those to be. I'm going to do them as a dragon. Well, I guess I should have done this in black. That's the great thing about markers. You can change it. Adding a blue under a black doesn't do any major drama. However, if I was to put this light blue on top of a black, the light blue would move the black out of the way. And I'll show you that a little bit later. Okay, so I'm just going to get this little area here all done up. Like so. Now I'm going to put the lids back on, make sure that it clicks. And then we're going to, I am actually going to take my black and show you that you can go over an area and pretty much take over that color. So I just colored this area so it's still a bit wet. But as you can see, I can easily just take over that whole color with the black without any issues. Again, we're going to flood the area. Using the bullet into the smaller areas. I've got both caps off, so make sure that you are careful when you have both caps off that you don't end up coloring yourself, because that's fairly easy to do as well when flipping the marker over. It is a bit of a chunkier marker, so if you're used to the slim Copics or the slimmer Tombow alcohol markers or things like that, this may feel a bit thick in your hand because, like I said, they are a chunkier monkey. Alright, just going to get around here. I'm actually going to do this for a reason because I'm going to show you some blending and that sort of thing on the lantern here. Just getting up close. And again, there is no bleed over because I'm using an alcohol paper. If I was to go over the lines, I would get some bleed over. So try not to go over the lines unless you want that color to be in that area. Alright, now I'm not going to go all the way down with it because I'm going to bring another color in for the light coming off the lantern. Come down through here though. Again, not going all the way to the edge because I don't want the black to take over his antennae. Now I'm going to flip it over, just fill in any areas that I've missed, which is easy to do with that bullet nib. Now I am going right up to the lantern with the black, and we'll push it back with the next color. Oh, got too close there. We'll put some glitter or something on his little antennae. So that they glow a little bit in the moonlight. I'm just going to cover right over it. Alright, so now we've dropped a lid on the floor. We've covered up that blue with the black, so you can definitely see that you are able to cover up a color with a darker color. But now we're going to add a lighter color. So we're going to add a glow from the lantern here. So we're going to start with cream, and we're coming off the lantern here with the cream. And we're moving that black over. And blending into it a little bit. And we're giving a couple of little light beams there. Now we're going to do the same thing with some yellow. And if you had a paper behind it, let's grab I thought I had some scrap here. Yeah, this will work. If you put a paper behind it, that color isn't going to pool behind your page. So it won't reabsorb. Like so. then we're going to add a bit of red to that as well. Let's do a little bit of vermilion. Now, as you can see, the black is coming back in and trying to take over that yellow. So I'm just going to push it back. Now, if you do this too much, you're going to end up pilling up your paper too much. But you just got to keep at it until that black is no longer pulling in. Because basically what happens is the black will come and pull into that lighter space because the lighter color is wetting it down a little bit. Once that lighter color isn't wetting it down anymore, it will stop pulling into that space. And putting this on the back side of it pushes that black through the paper. Just like it would if you had a blender. So I could have done this with a blender as well, but I wanted the color to be there. That's the flame. All right. So now we're going to just do a couple of little bit experiments on the flame here. So we're going to start with our flame in the center. And then we're going to do a little bit of red on it. Like so. And then we're going to take a light yellow. And then we're going to take a darker yellow. Like so. And that is our flame. Now this is a gas flame, so it would probably have a bit of blue, but that's okay. So as you can see, you can blend into and remove or move a color. You can definitely do the finer lines. Now we're going to go down here and we're going to use a light and a dark. So let me take these two here. And I'm going to use the fine points. All right. So with markers, it's better to start dark and then add your light. And as you can see, I can get into quite small details and still get that blend. which is good. So they do blend together quite nicely. They're not bleeding outside of the lines. Like I said, this is a marker paper, so that does make a difference. And we will try a bleed test here in a little bit as well, where we'll see how far it will bleed once it is over a line. Because once you go over one of those black lines, it's basically like opening the floodgates with your marker. The black line keeps your marker in where it needs to be, where it's supposed to be. And once you go over top of that, the marker basically breaks that line, and then all the alcohol, all the ink can flow over that line. Some markers don't flow very far over the line, so it's not a big deal. Other markers have a little bit of an issue with it. Sometimes you can get a good um, lack of movement for detailed areas if you don't want the movement. Usually, if I want the color to flood, I will go over a line with it. So that I can flood an area and not worry about those details that are there. Markers are very cool to play with, or great to color with. Um, if you have the right paper as well as the ability to be patient with them. Sometimes I don't have that ability. Sometimes they bug me because I can't get them to do exactly what I want them to do. All right, so now I'm going to put the lids back on. So as you can see, I've got a two-color blend there. And I put those in the wrong spots, but that's okay. Now I'm going to flood an area, so I'm going to use purple. So I want to see how far outside of this line here this purple is going to run. So I'm going to go in the line. But then I'm going to go over the line. Because this is what happens sometimes with small details. Because sometimes the nib is really fat or the details are really small, that kind of thing. Okay, so now I've gone over the line here, so I'm going to add some more ink. And we're going to see how far it moves off of that line. So it's not moving all that far. Which is good. So another way that you can test this, just to see how far it's going to move, is you can, where's my circle? I need my circle. Where did I put my circle? I just had it. I just had it earlier. I think I would have put it away where it belonged. Of course not. Alright, so I'm just going to put the lid on this for a second here. I need to find my circle because it's useful. And there it is. Told you I had it somewhere. Alright, so I'm going to draw a circle on here with my pen. We're going to do a medium circle. And we're going to test how far or how long it takes to fill that circle. And just by putting the marker in the center of it. So usually what we do is we put the ink in the middle and see how far it'll spread. So it's not spreading a whole lot. Now I can feel the paper starting to break down. So this is pretty much the point where you're going to have to stop adding the ink to it because the paper is breaking down. So as you can see, it didn't even fill that whole circle, which is kind of cool. So it's not going to spread as much as some markers. Like, for example, this one here. Let's grab a purple of this one. So this is a Cali Art. And the Cali Art do spread a little bit more. Which circle did we use? Did we use that one? Yes. So let's compare them to another budget-friendly marker. So this one here is Art Beek. And this one here is Cali Arts. Now this one is also a chisel. So again, we're going to sit in the center here. And we're going to do this until it starts feeling like the paper is breaking down. It's taking way more time for the paper to break down on the Cali Arts. There's the spread. So as you can see, we're starting to get the spread now because the paper in that area that we're laying the color down isn't going to hold any more ink. So what happens is it won't hold any more ink, so it starts spreading that ink across the paper. So if we give this a little bit of time. So I think the spread on it's pretty even. They're both still really wet, so. But as you can see, this one here is starting to feather out. And this one here is feathered out with a red or a pink line because it's more of a red violet than this one. They're different colors, although they're very close. Very close in the tips. So another thing is with the plastic parts that show you the color, that is not always going to be the color that the marker is. So make sure that you don't constantly go by that color. So it doesn't spread very far, which is great. However, it did put a little bit of wear on the page where the Castle Arts or the Cali Arts did not. So it doesn't spread very far. It does, of course, go through the page as usual, but it didn't spread very far, which is really, really good. That is one of those things that you look for when you're using a marker, is whether or not it's going to spread into an area that you don't want it to spread into. All right, so I'm just going to cover these areas. All right, like so. So that's, you know, like I said, the bullet nib is great for working those fine details, and the chisel, it does work well for covering large areas. Now, the one thing that I don't like is if I am working in a coloring book or anything like that, using a chisel nib does have a tendency to leave lines because it's hard to keep that edge wet in a book because the paper gets very, very thirsty and will suck all the ink right up, and it will not give you the opportunity to build that color without getting a line. Now we're going to do some orange and red on the leaves here, and we're going to blend them together. So we're going to use rose red and orange. So first we're going to lay down the orange on this leaf here, and then we're going to put the rose red into it. And then you can blend it if it has a bit of an edge into that orange. Another thing that you can do is you can take your red and you can put it on the tip of your orange or vice versa. Okay, so it's going to go vice versa. And it gives you that orangey red color. And then you can go in with your orange and blend it out. You have, if you're going to do a tip to tip, I do find that you have to move quite quickly because the alcohol ink will flow into that tip quite quickly and take over that color. So I'm just going back and forth blending those colors together to get the fall color that I want. Tip to tip works a lot better with brush pens. And the Art Beek do have a brush pen set. So they have a pen that does have the chisel and brush nibs. I wish that marker companies would choose to replace their, um, if they're going to do a brush and that kind of marker, that they would replace the chisel nib instead of the fine point nib, because I do find that the bullet is more useful for smaller details than the chisel is for larger details. I usually use the brush for larger details way more often than I do the chisel. So note to all alcohol marker companies out there, um, and I've heard it from several people that they do prefer the brush nibs with a chisel. So if you're going to put a brush nib in your marker, try to put it with a chisel instead of, try to put it as the chisel instead of replacing the bullet nib with it. Replace the chisel with it. All right, so we've got some combination, a couple of different colors in combination. We've also done a spread test, which it doesn't spread very far, which is really good. We've also done a blend into with a lighter color and a darker color, as well as a bleed out test. So if you go out of the lines, how far is it going to bleed? Now, it did not bleed very far. I'm actually really impressed with how little that bled, even though I went over the line. So it did not bleed very far, and it would be easily corrected. So let's take a blender. Now, like I said, this does not come with a blender, so you will have to use a blender from another source. And we're just going to see how easy it is to erase that bleed out. Now, basically what you're doing when you're using the blender is you're moving that pigment back into that ink back into where it needs to be, or pushing it through the paper. And it seems to have pushed it back through the paper and back into where the line is. So as you can probably see there, that ink is no longer there. And once that dries, you won't even see it, which is fantastic. And that's just the Ohuhu blender that I used. All right, so what are my thoughts on these markers? There's a really good color selection. I switch over to the main. There's a good color selection. The fine points work really well for details. They don't bleed a whole lot outside of the lines. They are going to bleed through the paper. So even though I have used an alcohol marker paper for my work today as well as my swatch, alcohol marker is always going to go through the paper. However, if you use coloring book paper, try to keep something fairly smooth behind your page. I have found that if I put a smooth piece of thick cardstock behind my page, the alcohol marker does sit and pool underneath it enough that I can get a good blend. But coloring book paper is very thirsty, so it will just suck up that marker and blending on coloring book paper is difficult with any marker. So, good selection of color. It even has quite a few of really good reds, which a lot of smaller sets tend to avoid. It does lack a little bit in purples, but it does have a good range of what purple they do have. A great range of blues, and a really good range of greens and browns, and even a really good range of grays. So with another thing with smaller marker sets is they tend to replace the grays with pastel colors and colors that they're not necessary. I would rather have a good selection of gray than a lighter color of purple than this. I can lighten this with a blender, where if I don't have a good selection of gray, I can't create a good selection of gray, if that makes sense. Yes, I could use a blender on the black and lighten the black, but you can only do that so far. And of course you can't, make a blue gray or a green gray, things like that, if you don't have the right colors. So first impressions, they work very, very nicely for coloring on marker paper. They don't give you a lot of hesitation lines, even if you hesitate. They do not bleed outside of the line. Even if you go over it, they'll only bleed a little tiny bit, where you can easily fix that with a blender. And yeah, a good selection of colors. And you can easily build that color from dark to light and create a gradients, which is great. With that, I'm not a huge marker person, so I don't know what tests to possibly do beyond the bleed test and beyond the paper test for markers, because like I said, I'm not a marker person. Now, I am going to show you one other thing here, because this is not marker paper. So this is my Nina cardstock. Now I have folded it in half because on the other side is another swatch chart that was not necessary. I did it wrong. So so we're going to actually do a little bit of that run test on this, because this is not marker paper. It's just the Nina cardstock, which is another thing that some of us use to color on. So let's see how it does. I'm going to switch you over to the close-up camera here. See how it does on that same test of spread on a basic cardstock instead of a alcohol marker paper. So I'm just going in a circle, filling that paper with ink. Now I can feel the paper starting to break down under the pen, so that's where I'm going to stop. And we'll give it a couple of seconds here, and we'll take a look. So as you can see, it went through both sides, so it did bleed through a lot. And it does move a little bit further than it did on this one, although I did make a smaller circle. So yeah, it's about the same. It's about the same. We've got a little bit of legging, so that means that it's moving a little bit. So let's take our and we're just going to draw a line through it and see if we can erase it. So it's not as easy to remove as it is on the alcohol paper. I'm using the same blender that I did on the alcohol paper, but it still does push it through. So yeah, I think it would be fine on Nina cardstock as well. So let's see about the bleed over. So we're going to, again, we're going to do a small circle. because, and then we're going to fill in and see how far it bleeds. So I'm just going to take rose red here. And you can feel the difference. You can feel the paper catching your marker underneath. Okay, so as you can see, I've got it all filled in. All right, now I'm going to push the marker over the line. And see how far it goes. So again, it's not bleeding a whole lot, and it only went a little ways off the line from where I touched. So it's actually doing quite well for being on just plain cardstock. So now we're going to push it back. And this is a red, so it doesn't erase as easily as a lighter color because it's a darker color. But it is removing that color. Basically what you're doing is you're pushing that color through to the opposite side of the page. And the more that you can push through to the opposite side of the page or onto a blotter page, the more you can erase. Now if I leave this sit and then go at it again, it will erase more. So yeah, it does erase. It's not as good of an erase as a lighter color, but it did not bleed a whole lot outside of that. So that's really good. So this is on just regular Nina cardstock, and it does erase a little bit, and it does not bleed a lot, which is good. So on coloring book paper, let's grab a coloring book here just while we're doing it. Okay, so we've got a coloring book here, and we've got some coloring book paper. Now, let's do this little guy here, just because the other side is the basic page. So we're going to grab this one here. And we're going to do his little face. Okay. So it is bleeding a little bit further on the coloring book paper. So just make sure that you watch where your marker color is going. Try not to go over the lines. So And when you come up close to the line, start lifting your marker. Now, because this has a black background, I'm not worried about it. But as you can see, it is bleeding into other areas. Now we're going to take a little bit of a darker brown. So I want bronze. So it is combining with that other color, with the brown gray, and it is taking it over and spreading out, even just by putting in the little dots. So it does spread a little bit with the marker paper, so just be careful with that. If you want a thin line, you may not get that because of the spread. Alright, then we're going to take this one here. We're just going to blend it a little bit. Softening up that solid line there. Now if this had been white on the outside there, it may have ended up spreading out into that on this part here. Alright. So let's do his little hat. We're going to start with grass green. And as you can see, that brown is spreading up into that green there, into the hat. Now I didn't do his ears for a reason. I haven't forgot them. I want to see if this green is going to spread onto his ears. Because sometimes on coloring book paper it doesn't matter if you go over the lines or not. Sometimes it will just spread no matter what you do. And it did not, which is good. So now we're going to take that brown gray. We're going to do the back side of his ears. And we're going to take a pinky tone and do the inside of his ears. And it did bleed in. Do his little nose too while we're here. Just going to add a bit of this brown, and then we're just going to soften the edge. With that pink. Alright. And then our darker green on the hat here. Again, I'm just using the chisel because, or not the chisel, the bullet, because it's a very small picture. And like I said, the bullet does have a place. I would rather have a bullet brush than a bullet chisel, but it does work for what we need it to work for. And I do understand why they do it. There's a lot of artists out there that do a lot of marker drawings, and the chisel does work well for them. But for coloring, I would rather have the smaller brush and chisel. All right, so he did quite well for a small picture. It didn't spread too far. It did spread down here quite a little bit. And like I said, this is on a black background, so it's not going to spread as far or that you're going to notice as if it was on white. So if this was just white behind him here, you would see the spread a little bit more than you would on a black edge. So I'll show you on here what I mean. So all of this is spread. So you can see that the spreading into the black is a lot more on this side than it is if you see it on this side. And that's because of the black. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of coloring books where they expect you to use markers, even though they use a really inexpensive paper, they'll put black on the back side of it so that you don't see as much of the spread as you do on a white backed paper. And he's cute. It didn't do too badly. Even this side's not that bad. It's kind of cute. So that is on coloring book paper, that is on cardstock, and as well as our alcohol marker paper. So personally, I think they did pretty well. That's about it for me. I would like to say thank you very much to Beek for sending me this set of markers to review. They are a fairly nice marker for a budget-friendly marker. Always remember to take a look at the links. I will leave the links below the video, and you know, see if there's other videos out there, and of course do a comparison. I'm not a huge marker person, so I don't do as many technical, I guess, marker testing. I test them the way that I use them, and if they don't spread, they don't bleed a lot, and they color very nicely and blend very nicely, that's pretty much the only testing that I will do. I'll test them on different papers and whatnot, but for me, they did very, very well. So we tested them on colored coloring book paper, alcohol marker paper, as well as on cardstock, Nina cardstock, and they did very, very well. So that is it for me. I would like to again say thank you to Beek for sending me this set of markers. And of course, always remember to like, comment, and subscribe to any YouTube artist that you enjoy. And always, always remember to relax, color, and stay safe, everyone. Until next time, bye bye for now.